Greetings and salutations. Thank you for lending an ear to the Voice of the Times this Tuesday, August 17, 2021. For today's editorial, Afghanistan, another U.S. misadventure in regime propping. After 2 decades, Afghanistan is once again under Taliban rule. It took less than a month for the militants to retake city after city before claiming the capital, Kabul. President Ashraf Ghani flew out of the country, even as his officials were negotiating with the Taliban for a peaceful transition of power, despite the Taliban's assurance that it will not resort to violence in taking over the reins of government. Kabul is in the grip of chaos, with thousands of Afghans swarming the international airport, trying to catch the last flights out. The U.S., which was in the final phase of ending its military mission in Afghanistan, scurried to redeploy almost 6,000 troops back to Kabul to cover the evacuation of the U.S. embassy and secure the airport. The swiftness with which the Taliban reconquered Afghanistan has blindsided the Biden administration, which is now in damage control mode. As the militants were closing in on Kabul, Biden was blaming the Afghan army for failing to evolve into an effective fighting unit. Look, we spent over $1 trillion for over 20 years. We trained and equipped with modern equipment over 300,000 Afghan forces, he told reporters at the White House. The president also chided Afghan leaders for relying too much on U.S. aid to stay in power. They've got to fight for themselves, fight for their nation, he said. Those are not exactly words of encouragement to an ally which was about to be overrun by its enemy. Another American misadventure is coming to a close, and Afghanistan will be remembered as the latest botched U.S. experiment in regime propping. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan in October of 2001, not to free the country from the iron grip of the Taliban, but to hunt for the mastermind of the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington a month earlier. When it failed to find Osama bin Laden, the U.S. decided to realign its mission in that country. In 2005, Afghan President Hamid Karzai and U.S. President George W. Bush agreed to make their countries strategic partners. U.S. forces would be allowed to use Afghan military facilities to carry out the war against international terror and the struggle against violent extremism. The long-term goal was to strengthen U.S.-Afghan ties and help ensure Afghanistan's long-term security, democracy, and prosperity. Washington was also to help organize, train, equip, and sustain Afghan security forces. Washington was confident the goal could be accomplished in just a few years. 20 years and 5 U.S. presidents later, Afghanistan had grown more dependent on U.S. patronage. The Kabul government had been hamstrung by infighting and corruption, and the Afghan army had become inept and dispirited. The Taliban, meanwhile, had regrouped to become a highly motivated fighting force and was gaining influence in the countryside. Biden decided it was time for the U.S. to take a new tack in Afghanistan to avoid getting mired in another forever war. But the shift is now more difficult to execute because of fast-breaking developments in Kabul. Evacuating the U.S. embassy could be the easy part. The looming nightmare is getting out the thousands of Afghans hired by the Americans as office workers and military translators who face certain death in the hands of the Taliban if they stay behind. U.S. administration officials say they are trying their best to prevent a Saigon moment, a reprise of America's ignominious exit from the Vietnam War in 1975. Reporters on the ground in Kabul believe the capital is already in the midst of a Saigon moment. Vietnam is the other major experiment in regime propping that exploded in the U.S.'s face. For decades, Washington had subscribed to the domino theory that if one Asian democracy succumbs to communist domination, the rest of the region would follow like tumbling tiles. South Vietnam must therefore be defended at all cost. The U.S. spent billions of dollars backing puppet governments in Saigon before deciding to cut the strings. Apparently, the lessons from the Vietnam conflict have not resonated long enough for Washington's policymakers to take heed, and now they are paying the price. And that's the editorial for Tuesday, August 17, 2021. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to our digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and listen to the Voice of the Times.